The Grand Council chamber on 452B was built to intimidate. Tall walls of dark stone reached toward a ceiling that seemed to go on forever. Lights came from above, casting shadows that made everything look bigger and more dangerous. Princess Lyra stood at the head of a long table, her blue skin glowing under the artificial lights. Her thin, elegant fingers rested on the table's surface. 3 guards stood behind her, their bodies rigid and still. They wore the uniform of the royal court, which meant power and authority that no one had ever questioned. Lyra had come to this small human colony to deliver an order, not to negotiate. The Empire had decided that humanity could be useful, but only if they understood their place in the galaxy. Humanity was young. They had only recently left their home world. They did not have the weapons they had. They did not have the technology or the knowledge of how things worked in the wider universe. In Lyra's mind, this made them easy to control. She had given the order for this meeting herself. The humans would listen, accept their position, and do what she told them to do. The doors to the chamber opened. A man walked in. He was tall and broad, with dark hair and a face that showed no emotion. His uniform was simple blue and gray, nothing like the ornate clothing that Lyra wore. His eyes were calm and steady. He moved across the room with a purpose that seemed to have no doubt behind it. His name was Captain Daniel Foster, and he was the leader of humanity's forces on this world. Lyra's breath caught. She did not understand why. She had faced down enemies before. She had stood before the council and defended her family's honor. She had never felt fear. But as Foster entered the room, something inside her reacted. Something ancient and deep in her blood sent a signal to her brain. Every muscle in her body wanted to move backward. Her guards felt it too. One of them made a small sound, barely a noise, but it was there. Lyra stepped back. Her feet moved before her mind could tell them to stop. She was the princess of the Empire, and she had just stepped away from a human. This should have been impossible. This should have never happened. Foster did not react to her movement. He simply walked to the table and pulled out a chair. He sat down like he was sitting in his own home, relaxed and sure. He looked at Lyra with eyes that held no fear, no respect, no submission. He just looked at her like she was another person in the room. "Princess Lyra," Foster said. His voice was clear and strong. "Thank you for meeting with us. We have prepared information about humanity's achievements in space travel and exploration. We would like to share this with you." Lyra could not speak for a moment. No one had ever ignored her position. No one had ever treated her like an equal when they clearly were not. Yet Foster did not seem to be challenging her or being disrespectful. He simply was being himself, and that self did not recognize fear or submission. She forced her voice to work. "You understand why I am here, human?" Foster nodded. "We understand the Empire has sent you to deliver a message. We would like to hear it, but we would also like you to hear from us." The way he said it was not defiant. He was not angry. He was simply stating what would happen. Lyra had heard of human stubbornness. The reports had mentioned it, but reading about it and facing it were two different things. She sat down again, her movements controlled and precise. She would not show weakness, but inside her mind was working very fast. Something was wrong with this human. Something was different about the way he carried himself. They had faced many species. They had conquered most of them, but those species had always shown fear or respect. This one showed neither. "Your achievements mean nothing if you do not have the strength to survive," Lyra said coldly. Foster opened a document on the table screen. Images and data appeared. He began to speak about humanity's history. He talked about the Ice Age, about survival in harsh conditions, about ancestors who had hunted predators larger than themselves. He talked about disease and famine and survival. He spoke in simple words, but behind those words was something that made Lyra listen. "We come from a world that tried to kill us every day," Foster said. "For thousands of years we had to fight to survive. We did not have the technology, we did not have the advantage, but we had the will to keep living and we found ways. This is what humans do. We survive, we adapt, we find solutions to impossible problems." Lyra listened to him describe human achievement in medicine, in engineering, in the ability to work together even when resources were scarce. She had expected bragging. She had expected empty words. Instead, Foster presented facts and let them speak for themselves. When he finished speaking about humanity's medical advances, Lyra leaned forward slightly. "And what do you want from the Empire in exchange for this information?" Foster paused. "Nothing. We offer this as a gesture of goodwill. We hope to be your partners in the galaxy, not your servants or your enemies." No one in the room moved. Lyra's guards looked at each other. Partners. A human had just said the word to the princess of the Empire and meant it as an honest statement, not as a joke or a test. Lyra felt something shift inside her mind. The way Foster had looked at her when he entered, the way he held himself, the way he spoke without fear or doubt, all of it suddenly made sense. He was not challenging her authority because to him, authority meant something different. He was not submitting because submission was not something his mind recognized as necessary. He was simply being what he was, and what he was did not fit into the categories that society understood. The princess of the Empire realized, for the first time in her life, that she might be looking at something greater than herself, not in technology or power, but in something else, something that they had forgotten how to be. Foster watched her face and did not smile. He simply waited for her to respond. Princess Lyra sat in the quarters that the humans had given her. The room was simple but clean. The walls were white and smooth. A window showed the landscape of 452B outside, with mountains in the distance and a sky that was slightly more orange than the sky on the. She had sent her guards away an hour ago. She needed to think without anyone watching her. Foster had not left her mind. When he had entered the council chamber, something inside her had broken, or maybe something had awakened. Lyra was not sure which was correct. She had spent her entire life learning how to use power. She understood the rules of the Empire. You showed strength. You demanded respect. You made other beings afraid of you or dependent on you. There was no middle ground. There was no way to be human about it. But Foster had walked into that room like he did not know these rules. Or worse, like he did not care about them. The princess stood and walked to the window. She could see humans working in the fields below. They were maintaining crops that would feed the colony. The work was hard and repetitive, yet they moved with a kind of satisfaction that Lyra did not understand. Such work was done by machines or by the lowest members of society. No one of value would do it themselves. Lyra had read the files on human culture before she came here. She had expected to find a civilization driven by the same things that drove the power, dominance, the desire to rule over others. Instead, she had found something confusing. Humans seemed to care about things that did not matter. They cared about family. They cared about honor. They cared about what they called justice. The next day, Lyra attended another meeting with Foster and other human leaders. This time, she came prepared to test them. She would find the weakness. Every species had a weakness. They exploited it, and that was how they kept control. You offer medicine, Lyra said. But medicine is power. Why would you give power to a rival? Foster sat beside her again. His presence did not unsettle her as much today, but it still created a strange feeling in her mind. Because keeping people alive is more important than having power over them. That makes no sense, Lyra said flatly. It makes sense if you value life, said a woman who was introduced as Dr. Hayes. She was tall and had light skin and red hair. She looked at Lyra with clear eyes. We have lived on a world that tried to kill us. We learned that every life is valuable. Every person who survives adds to the strength of the whole. If we keep you alive, we are not losing anything. We are gaining an ally who understands that cooperation is stronger than competition. Lyra wanted to argue, but something in the woman's voice stopped her. There was no manipulation in it. There was no hidden trap. The doctor was speaking what she believed to be true. They have a disease, Lyra said slowly. A degenerative condition. Many of my people suffer from it. There is no cure. We know, Foster said. We have reviewed your medical files. We believe we can help. Lyra felt something close to anger. You say you can cure something that they have accepted as fate. Yes, Dr. Hayes said simply. We can. We have the research. We have the treatment. We would like to help. The meeting ended and Lyra returned to her quarters. She sat alone again and she understood that the humans were not playing a game she knew how to win. They were not trying to beat her. They were simply being what they were, honest, direct, powerful without needing to prove it. In the Empire, this kind of behavior would be seen as weakness. But as Lyra thought about it, she began to see something different. Foster did not need to fear her. Dr. Hayes did not need to respect her position because she was already secure in who she was. They offered help not because they wanted something in return, but because they had decided that helping was right. Lyra opened a communication line to the council was waiting to hear about the humans. The situation is complicated, she told them. The humans have capabilities we did not anticipate. Their approach to power is different from ours. I recommend we observe them further before making any decisions. This was not a lie, but it was not the full truth either. The truth was that Lyra was beginning to understand something that terrified her more than any weapon. The humans were not weaker than they were different, and that difference made them stronger in ways that they had forgotten how to measure. Over the next week, Lyra spent more time with Foster and his team. They showed her their medical facilities. They showed her their research. They explained their technology in clear words that anyone could understand. They did not try to impress her. They did not try to intimidate her. They simply showed her who they were and what they could do. And slowly, Lyra realized something that had never happened to her before. She was beginning to respect someone who was not. Not because they had forced her to respect them, but because their actions deserved respect. Foster noticed the change in her. One evening, he sat beside her in the observation room, and they watched the sunset together. The sky turned deep red and purple. "You are beginning to understand," he said. It was not a question. "Understand what?" Lyra asked. "That strength is not about forcing others to bow down. It is about knowing who you are and what you value, and then being willing to fight for that. We are willing to die for the people we care about. We are willing to help even those who came to harm us. That is what makes us strong." The pain started in Lyra's head. It was a dull ache that grew stronger with each passing hour. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself it would pass. They were strong. They did not get sick. They endured. By the second day, her hands had started to tremble. By the third day, she could barely stand without help. The degenerative disease that had plagued her people for generations was claiming her now, just as it had claimed thousands of others before her. Lyra collapsed in her quarters. A human aide found her and called for help. Within minutes, Dr. Hayes was standing over her, looking at the symptoms with a calm and focused expression. "It is the disease," Lyra said through pain. "There is no treatment. I accept this." "No," Dr. Hayes said. "You do not have to accept it. We have a treatment. We have been developing it for months based on your medical files. It will work." Lyra wanted to refuse. Every part of her training told her that accepting help from humans was weakness, that showing this vulnerability was a mistake, that she should endure the pain as a princess should, but her body was failing and her mind was growing foggy. She could not think clearly enough to argue. They moved her to the human medical facility. The room was bright and filled with equipment that she did not understand. Foster came to see her. He stood beside her bed and did not speak. He simply was there, a steady presence that meant something. "Why?" Lyra asked him. Her voice was weak. "Why do you care if I live or die?" Foster looked at her with those steady eyes. "Because your life has value, not because you are a princess, not because of what you can offer us, but because you are alive and that matters." Dr. Hayes began the treatment. It was a series of injections combined with a medicine that tasted bitter when swallowed. Lyra wanted to believe it was a trick. She wanted to believe that the humans were poisoning her to weaken the Empire. But as the days passed, something changed. The pain started to reduce. The trembling in her hands stopped. Her mind became clear again. Day after day, she felt stronger. Day after day, the symptoms that had controlled her life began to disappear. On the seventh day, Lyra stood on her own for the first time in a week. She looked at her hands, and they were steady. She looked at Dr. Hayes, and tears came to her eyes. This had never happened to her before. She had been trained not to show emotion. "It worked," Hayes said simply. "You are going to be fine." Foster was standing in the doorway. He did not smile. He did not say anything. He simply nodded like he had known all along that this would be the outcome. The guard came to Lyra's room that evening. He was large and strong, and his blue skin was marked with the tattoos of a royal warrior. He looked at her with confusion and something that might have been shame. "Princess," he said, "the Empire questions whether you should accept this treatment. They say it may have altered your mind. They want you to return and be examined." Lyra felt anger move through her, but it was not the cold anger of a royal princess. It was a human kind of anger. It was anger at those who refused to see the truth. "Tell the council that I am fine. Tell them that the humans have cured what we said was incurable. Tell them that we have been wrong about many things." The guard left without responding. Lyra knew that her message would create chaos in the council, but she did not care. For the first time in her life, she had been given something that she had not earned through power or threat. She had been given a gift, and that gift had changed everything. Foster invited her to dinner that night. It was a simple meal, bread and meat and vegetables grown in the human fields. Lyra sat across from him and realized that she was not afraid anymore. The ancient instinct that had made her step backward when he entered the council chamber was gone. "Your people will reject this," Foster said, looking at his food. "They will say we have corrupted you. They will demand your return to the—" "Yes," Lyra said, "but they will also wonder. They will wonder how I survived something they believed was death. They will wonder what I have learned here, and some of them will begin to ask if everything they believe is true." Foster looked at her. "Is it enough? Will doubt be enough to change things?" "Change is slow," Lyra said. "But it happens. I came here to deliver orders and assert dominance. Instead, I have learned that dominance is not the same as strength. A species that can cure disease is strong. A leader who can admit error is strong. A people who can help even their enemies are strong. They have been measuring strength with the wrong instruments." She paused. "My people sent me to control you, but you have not tried to control me. You have freed me from something that I believed was fate. That is a power that the do not understand." Commander Grant entered the room. He was the human security chief, a man with gray in his hair and scars on his arms. He carried himself with the same confidence as Foster. "The Empire is sending more ships," he said. "They want confirmation of your status. They are not convinced that you are safe." Foster nodded. "Tell them the princess is welcome to leave at any time. Tell them we will not hold her here." Lyra felt something shift inside her. They were giving her a choice. They would never do that. They would demand, threaten, and control. The humans offered freedom. "I will send a message," Lyra said. "But I am not leaving, not yet. There is much more I need to understand." The message from Lyra to the council created an earthquake in the royal palace fell into chaos. Advisors argued about what the princess's words meant. Some believed she had been brainwashed. Others thought the humans had poisoned her mind with chemicals. Still others wondered if what she was saying could possibly be true. Minister was the eldest advisor in the council. He had served 3 emperors before the current one. He was respected, and his words carried weight. He read Lyra's message 3 times before he spoke to the council. "She says she was cured of the degenerative disease," said slowly. "This is impossible. We have accepted this disease as unchangeable for 2,000 years, yet the princess claims the humans have found a cure." "It is a trick," said another council member. Her name was Vex, and she was known for her military mind. "The humans want us to trust them so they can attack us when our guard is down." Shook his head. "If that were their plan, they would have tried to harm her directly. Instead, they healed her. This does not match the behavior of an enemy." Emperor sat on his throne, watching the debate. He was older than Lyra, and his blue skin was marked with the scars of a warrior from his youth. He had ruled the Empire for 30 years. He had expanded their territory and made them feared across the galaxy. "Bring the princess home," he commanded. "We will examine her ourselves." But Lyra refused to come back. She sent another message instead. This one was different. In it, she described exactly what the humans had done to cure her. She provided the medical data. She explained the science in clear language that even those who did not understand medicine could follow. She described Captain Foster and Dr. Hayes and Commander Grant. She painted a picture of humans not as primitive beings to be controlled, but as intelligent and capable individuals. Most importantly, she described the moment when Captain Foster had offered her a choice. When the humans had said they would let her go if she wished. When they had given her freedom instead of demanding obedience. "In the system we take, in the human system they give," Lyra wrote. "I do not know which system creates greater strength, but I know that the humans are not weak. They are not inferior. They are different, and their difference is not a weakness." The message was spread through the Empire. Soldiers read it. Scientists read it. Common citizens read it. And something began to shift in how people thought about the humans. Minister called for a scientific review of the medical data that Lyra had sent. The minds in the Empire examined it. They confirmed that the treatment was real and that it worked. They confirmed that humans had achieved something that had eluded science for 2,000 years. Vex was angry. She came to the council chamber and argued for a military response. "This is exactly the kind of advantage they want us to fear," she said. "If they can cure the disease, they have leverage over us. They can demand whatever they want." But stood and challenged her. "And what will military action accomplish? Will it take back the cure? Will it undo what they have already done for the princess? Or will it simply prove that they were right to fear us? If we attack them because they have become stronger, we prove that we only value those who are weak enough to control." The debate raged for days, but slowly the reality became impossible to ignore. The humans had demonstrated a capability that they could not ignore. More importantly, they had demonstrated a different way of thinking about power. Emperor made a decision. He would meet with the humans himself. He would bring his advisors and his best minds. They would go to 452B and see what the humans had truly accomplished. The ships arrived at the colony 2 weeks later. Foster and his team prepared to meet the Emperor. Lyra stood beside Foster as they waited for the Emperor to disembark. When Emperor saw his daughter, he stopped. She looked different, stronger. There was a light in her eyes that had not been there before. She was no longer just a princess. She was someone who had learned something profound. "Father," Lyra said. She did not bow, she stood as an equal. Emperor looked at Foster. The human captain extended his hand in the human gesture of greeting, had read about this gesture. In culture, it would be a sign of surrender or submission. But as Foster held out his hand, understood that the humans meant something different by it. They meant respect between equals. The Emperor took Foster's hand and shook it. The meeting went on for 6 hours. Foster and his team presented data, research, and explanations. They did not boast about what they had accomplished. They did not demand anything in return. They simply showed what they had done and why they had done it. When the Emperor asked why humans had helped Foster answered with the same honesty that had won over Lyra. "Because keeping people alive is more important than having power over them," Foster said. "We came to a new world. We could have fought you. We could have hidden. Instead, we offered friendship. You came to us with demands. We offered cooperation. This is what humans do." Emperor was quiet for a long time. Then he spoke. "For 2,000 years, they have assumed that any species we encountered would either become our servants or our enemies. There has been no middle ground in our thinking. Your existence proves that middle ground is possible." He turned to Minister. "We will negotiate a treaty. The Empire will have access to the cure. In exchange, we will offer our technology and our resources. We will be partners with humanity, not masters." Vex stood to protest, but the Emperor silenced her with a look. "They have conquered many worlds through strength, but perhaps it is time to try something different. Perhaps it is time to see if a species can grow through cooperation instead of domination." That night there was a celebration. Humans and drank together and shared stories. They learned about each other's worlds and histories. An old human soldier named talked with a warrior about the nature of honor and what it meant to fight for something you believed in. Lyra stood with her father and watched Foster talking with the other humans. She saw the way they moved together, confident and sure of who they were. She saw the way they treated each other with respect and friendship. "You came here to control them," she said to her father. "But they have controlled nothing. They have changed you, and they have changed me by simply being exactly who they are." Emperor nodded slowly. "Perhaps that is the greatest power of all, not to force change, but to inspire it through example. Your mother would have understood this. She always said that strength without compassion is just violence with a pretty name." 6 months had passed since the treaty was signed. The documents sat in a great hall witnessed by leaders from both species. The signatures and seals meant that humanity was no longer a young species trying to find its place in the galaxy. Humanity was now a recognized power, not through military conquest, but through the power of what they could offer and who they chose to be. Lyra stood in the viewing chamber of the new research station that had been built between the human colony and the settlements. Below them, humans worked together to develop new medicines. The disease that had plagued for 2,000 years was being studied and understood. A permanent cure was being created. Captain Foster came to stand beside her. He no longer wore his military uniform during these visits. He wore the simple clothes of a scientist or engineer, but his presence was still the same. Calm, focused, certain. "Your father has agreed to the education exchange program," Foster said. Young humans will study together. They will learn each other's languages and understand each other's way of thinking." Lyra smiled. This was the part that excited her most. Not the medicine or the technology, but the chance for the next generation to grow up without the fear that had divided their peoples. "I have been thinking about that day," she said, "when I stepped back from you in the council chamber." Foster looked at her with those steady eyes. "And what have you concluded?" "I stepped back because I recognized something that my people had forgotten how to recognize. Truth. Real strength does not come from making others afraid. It comes from knowing who you are and being willing to stand by that knowledge even when no one believes you. You walked into that room like you had nothing to prove. That was terrifying to someone who had spent her entire life proving her worth through power. Foster nodded slightly. Fear of the unknown is natural, but we showed you that the unknown was not dangerous. It was just different. Below them, a young scientist was explaining something to a human colleague. They were both bent over a microscope, looking at data together. They were not master and servant. They were not conqueror and conquered. They were partners. My father wants to establish a human ambassador on the, Lyra said. Someone who will live there and work with our government. He believes this will accelerate understanding between our peoples. Who have they chosen? Foster asked. You, Lyra said, if you accept. Foster was silent for a moment, then he looked at her. I will accept, but I will need someone to help me understand culture and politics, someone who understands both worlds. I will return with you, Lyra said. I will serve as a bridge between our peoples, not as a princess, but as someone who understands that the future is worth fighting for. 3 weeks later, the ship carried Foster and Lyra to the. When they arrived, a crowd had gathered. Thousands of citizens wanted to see the human who had changed their understanding of the galaxy. They wanted to see the princess who had chosen to stand beside him. Some looked at Foster with fear. That ancient instinct had not completely disappeared from the mind. But others looked at him with curiosity. Others looked at him with hope. Minister was waiting in the great hall of the palace. He bowed to Foster, not the way a bows to someone they consider superior, but the way humans bow to each other. It was a gesture of respect between equals. Welcome, Captain Foster said. The Empire is honored by your presence. Foster extended his hand, shook it firmly. Then Vex came forward. She was still angry, Lyra could see that. She was still convinced that humans were a threat, but she extended her hand too. That was enough for now. Emperor came to greet Foster himself. The Emperor was tall and powerful, with the bearing of someone who had ruled for decades. He looked at the human captain and saw something that his predecessor had never imagined. He saw possibility. You have brought my daughter back to me as someone new, the Emperor said. She came to us as a princess trained in power. She returns as someone trained in something we had forgotten. Thank you for this gift. Foster bowed slightly in the human way. They are a great people. They needed only to remember what greatness truly means. The months that followed were filled with meetings and negotiations and the slow work of understanding. Foster learned the language. He learned their history and their way of thinking. But more than that, he lived among them and showed them through his actions what humanity valued. He worked in the medical research center, helping develop new treatments. He ate with families and listened to their stories. He stood in the Great Hall during debates and argued for cooperation and mutual respect. Some accepted him quickly. Others took longer, but everyone saw that he was serious. He was not there to conquer or control. He was there to build something new. One evening, Lyra and Foster stood on the highest tower of the palace. They could see across the entire capital city. The lights of the buildings reflected off the buildings below. Do you regret coming here? Lyra asked. No, Foster said. This is what humans have always done. We go to new places and we show the people there who we are, not through force but through being ourselves. Honest, loyal, willing to help even when we get nothing in return. Eventually, people understand that these qualities are more valuable than conquest. Lyra leaned against the tower wall. She thought about the moment when Foster had entered the council chamber. She thought about the fear and the confusion. She thought about the journey that had brought her from that moment to this one. My people believed that strength was power, she said. But you have shown us that strength is something else. It is the ability to look at someone who came to dominate you and choose mercy instead of revenge. It is the ability to stand by what you believe even when no one else understands. It is the ability to help others become better than they were before. Foster looked at her. Humanity is not perfect. We make mistakes. We have failed many times, but we have always believed that tomorrow can be better than today. That next year can bring more understanding than this year, that the future belongs to those who are willing to change and grow. He paused. You have changed, Princess. Not because we forced you to change, but because you were willing to see what we could offer. That is the real victory, not my presence not the medicine or the technology, but the fact that a princess was willing to stand beside a human and say, there is another way. As they stood together watching the city lights, both of them understood that this was just the beginning. The galaxy would continue to change. More species would meet the humans and wonder at their strength that came from compassion rather than conquest. Some would accept the lesson. Others would resist. But on this world, in this moment, a new chapter had been written. Not in blood or in the triumph of the strong over the weak, but in the recognition that real strength comes from choosing to be better. And as the stars appeared above them, Lyra understood that the universe was watching. The galaxy was watching to see if the and humanity could truly build something new together. And they would not fail. Not because they were the strongest, but because they had learned that strength without compassion is just power with nothing behind it. The future was uncertain, but it was full of possibility. And for the first time in her life, the princess of the empire was not afraid of what might come next. For the first time, Lyra saw her father as more than an emperor. She saw him as a being capable of growth and change. And she understood that this was what the humans had brought to the galaxy. Not conquest or dominance, but the possibility of becoming better than you were before. About your people, and I think there is much that your people need to understand about mine. The cure you gave me is the beginning of something bigger than either of us knows. Foster smiled for the first time since Lyra had known him. It was a small smile, but it was real. And in that moment, the princess of the empire understood that she had been reborn into a new way of thinking. The old Lyra would never exist again, and she was glad. Lyra said nothing, but she looked at him, and for the first time, she did not feel the need to step back. The human had broken something in her world, but maybe, she thought, it needed to be broken. The meeting had only just begun, but Lyra knew that everything would change from this moment forward.